Hi, my name's Cole Fay, and I'm here with my colleague Sarah McCallum, and we're both studio practitioners, and we work for the Otago Polytechnic here in New Zealand. And the impetus for us today was actually discussing things around developing our learners for a changing work environment, a world which is still a little bit unsettled, and how do we negotiate that through careful facilitation of their learning in order to sort of build a resilient graduate that is capable of applying these sort of skills. We work quite closely to industry stakeholders, and their views on the relationship between education and industry is, for graduates, they have a high level of value that's placed on attributes that are linked with well-developed resilient skills, self-motivation and critical thinking in particular. We like to think about that. We embed these sort of strategies within the studio practice.
Yeah, I think the key lens that we are using to do this is through this idea of curiosity, or being curious. So that's really what we wanted to unpack today in this short presentation.
So we thought about the relationship of the normal approach to any creative field with this word creative in itself, and we felt that the creative word creates sort of like an attribute that learners believe that they possess or they don't possess. And we have found over a long period of time that that can often block or be a block towards their experimentation. So we decided just a simple shift in labelling the approach to their course in terms of using curiosity as a way to navigate inquiry-based learning practices.
In terms of who our learners are, we are a relatively small program. We like to think of ourselves as boutique. So our first year cohort is around 43 learners this year. Majority of them are coming fairly, straight from school or close to, that school experience, a secondary school experience, although we do have a good mix of some more mature or returning learners as well. And interestingly, what we see, particularly in our learners coming straight from secondary school, is quite a gap between the expectations of the tertiary learning environment and their understanding of what it means to learn. So a big part of what we are doing in our first year within the studio is really this notion of unlearning, so kind of unpacking practices and habits, actually, that they associate with learning in a creative subject, and sort of repackaging that to better align with both industry practices and the academic notion of architectural education.
Yeah, so in this way, what we feel as though students arrive with is a very prescriptive understanding of learning. And for us, we like to think that we deal in higher thinking in an open-endedness, which is actually somewhat challenging. So it's all for us about developing a culture within our learners that encourages and also at the same time generates a equal playing field. Yeah.
I think that's where we originally came up with this idea of considering curiosity, because when we think about creativity, we define it here as imaginative activity fashioned to produce outcomes that are both original and of value. So in a way, the very definition of creativity sort of highlights the issue with it, in the sense that it's highly subjective, and it can be quite confronting in a sense to learners who may believe that they either, have this ability to be creative or they don't. And so much of that has come through the conditioning that occurs as we grow up and move away from, the idea of learning through play to learning that is a lot more structured. So by reframing it instead to think about curiosity, which is kind of moving from this more closed opinion of the creative into something that is just being eager or, keen to know or learn about something. What is it that really drives you? What do you want to know? And it's got to be present within our learners to really sustain them through our program. This thirst for knowledge, this thirst to know more, and to continually be learning more is really what we're looking to build.
So within our studio practice itself, we believe that students learn through the actions of us, and that instigates a sort of a core thread of our approach to education generally. The notion of curiosity, we've utilised the platform of our Moodle shell along with our own practice to sort of instigate prompts. And instead of thinking about a Moodle shell or a Blackboard repository of knowledge and information, we're using it as a platform that instigates further inquiry. And we've tried to do that in a way that is small pockets of questions or links to courses or posing sort of open-ended questions, really. It's not about a lot of reading, it's not about a lot of doing, but it's really about opening the opportunity to be more curious.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess this response of ours has come as a reaction to what we see as a typical skill set and also set of values in learners who come into our program. And we see this evidence before they even start in portfolios that are submitted to gain entry. So these are a couple of images from a fairly typical portfolio, which are pictures of work that have been done in design courses in secondary education. And as we see so many of these coming through, we have really noticed that there is quite a prescriptive approach often, which is purely driven by, numbers, I believe. But what it shows us is that creative practices within the educational curriculum have sort of lost this looseness and this idea of risk-taking and freedom, and are more centered around formalized processing of ideas and evidence of that through quite specific imagery. What we mourn in a way is this idea of learning through play, which is so inherent in childhood but becomes eroded as we grow, where we're less driven by our innate imagination and creativity. This approach, on the other hand, is quite derivative, and it's more about acquisition of skills as opposed to inquiry. So the idea that we can demonstrate our knowledge through skills, is clear in these images, but what's not clear is this idea of the ability to learn, so the ability to be curious.
So the idea for us is that keen critical skills of architectural design itself is within innovation and originality. And it's around about solving a set of highly complex problems in a unique way. Originality is something that is subjective, because what we want students really to do, not to be informed by research, which is where they often find the instigation of new idea, but to not appropriate it and to see that what we're looking for is a deeper way of understanding the notion of actual research that informs new practice and new ideas. So our learners need to understand the importance of experimentation and play, because through this process is where they take the found idea and they transform it into their own, thereby original thought.
Yeah, I think that's quite critical, is that difference between being informed and being transformed by research, and that's really what we're seeking to develop, is that ability for research and reading and learning to really be transformative, as opposed to just informing the obvious.
And part of that is also a willing to experiment and to fail. And that's something that we have found that our students really struggle with, because they are, based on their previous experiences, they often identify a solution early and just follow that solution through to a final resolution. Whereas we are not about the resolution, and believe that the resolution will be arrived at through a thorough and concrete process of interrogation and inquiry methods. Here's a small example of part of our Moodle shell, just the type of prompts that I was talking about earlier. Again, I'm not asking them to do anything about other than watch this very small video clip, but what that small video clip is supported by opportunities to inquire more, by me posing some sort of open-ended prompts there for them to consider, but not do. And I think that's really important in terms of instigating inquiry. Is not for it to become a task, but to become an opportunity.
Yeah, I think we've learned through experience that loading the learners up with a whole bunch of tasks along the way sort of just ends up reducing the deeper learning. Actually, there's sort of a lack of time just to ponder and consider, how do I actually respond to this myself, rather than what am I being expected to do here. So it actually, in giving that space, allows them to have that time, I believe.
And I think what Sarah sort of just instigated there was this idea that what we believe in is actually the student becomes a vital component, and it's turning the frame around back on them, that they are part of the inquiry, and it's not from our perspective, it's for their learning, and that is that they're part of it and not an observer, and that is really a critical element, actually, how we approach things.
Yeah, moving away from that sort of tick box and teacher-driven learning to us being able to step back and just facilitate that journey for them, which is really where the magic happens.
It is, yeah.
So as well as our focus on the way we provide resources, we also place a really heavy emphasis on the workbook. So the workbook is really at the core of our pedagogy, actually. It's quite a mindset shift for our learners to understand what a workbook should be and how that would differ from a scrapbook. So we utilise the workbook not as an archive, but as a living, breathing object. And you can see in this video here a fantastic example of, a beautiful, messy, reflective, alive workbook from a first year project.
And it also echoes, actually, even in this, what we see here, is that the design process is not linear.
Yes.
And there's opportunities to go backwards and forwards. There's opportunities to put more layers. That design is actually a layered thing, and that layering creates complexity. And I think that's really nicely instigated through our approach to the workbook, and the students buy in to that as a design process.
And then in terms of our ability to read the levels of curiosity in our learners, the workbook is also the perfect vehicle for that, because we can see if they are questioning themselves or if they're following a direction, based off something that has interested them, or if they're just, cutting and pasting single images from Pinterest on a page, So it becomes plainly evident where that curiosity lies, and then that also gives us an opportunity to, through discussion, to expand on that and learn more about what's really driving them. So what we're really seeing is evidence of the value of this focus on curiosity is coming out in a really strong ability in not all, but a lot of our learners to actually self-critique and building their reflective practice right from year one. And this is another example from a workbook that we weren't actually even aware until we came to look at it at the end of the project that this process had occurred, which I think is what actually makes it so exciting. It was really driven by the learner and this willingness to not settle and to really dig deep and question what they thought they knew, and then to let that drive them in a new direction, which I think is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, and this image here in particular, I really like how the student is using the workbook as a way to interrogate in a critical way her strategies and her planning in relation to a brief. And what we see here is evidence of multi-layered reflective practice going on. And what was an absolute delight actually for us, because we also instigate group feedback sessions, that our students naturally started talking to each other, prompting for more inquiry from each other as part of just their everyday cultural practice. And so by the time these students arrive to a situation where they are more formalized, that any sort of justification of their design process or outcomes have a solid understanding and background behind them, and that there should be less superficiality and more deeper critical thinking in their journey as future practitioners, and also contributing members, because like I sort of said, that already they are showing evidence of not insular practice, but really the idea of collaboration and the idea of the collective, and the notion that knowledge is not a singular thing, that it's reciprocal. That's really, yeah.
And I think that in itself is actually a really nice place to leave it, because it's showing us that there is a developing resilience, and that's really what's going to carry them through, as courses get more challenging and workloads increase and industry beckons, they have that resilience and that sort of toolkit to fall back on. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.